Welcome to Bytes and Beyond, where we explore the intersections of tech, culture, and life. I'm Sai, a data analyst fascinated by how technology shapes our world. So each week I sit down with fascinating guests who are pushing boundaries in their fields. And today we have, I think, an incredible one. And also I can say a good neighbor. It's been a long time as someone who's in the same town. So today we're joined by Val, the co-founder and CEO of IO Blend, an automated Spark data integration platform. So before launching his own company, he spent over 13 years at EasyJet. Well, I can say 13 years and working on network planning and schedule optimization. Now he's tackling one of the biggest challenges in data engineering, making it faster, more accessible, and more efficient. So we'll be talking about his journey from aviation to now data engineering, maybe even proceed to AI-driven data solutions, what it takes up to build a startup, and where the future of data engineering is headed. So before we dive into all things data, I want to ask personal questions that did you ever miss working in aviation now that you have come out of that? So what's one thing people don't realize about the airline industry?
Absolutely. They always told me when I first time went into aviation. Oh, hello, everybody, by the way. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast, Sai. It was great meeting you before and now realizing that we live in the same town indeed, which is even more interesting. Yeah, so back to aviation, very interesting. So when I was first sort of doing research around the industry, they basically said, look, it's a lifestyle, essentially. Once you get onto the aviation, it gets under your skin forever. It's a very interesting type of business. And as we go through this podcast, I'll kind of reveal why and where.
Yeah.
Yes, I do miss it. There's nothing really like aviation. Well, there might be some other sort of kind of knife edge businesses where things can go wrong in the next 10 minutes. There's always action going on the operational side. And then you're sort of looking at different horizons when you're doing planning cycles. So you sort of, if we look even today in 2025, EasyJet would already be working on summer 2026. So their world is a year ahead.
1 year ahead.
Correct. So now is already ancient history. Whereas finance people in the company would be looking at now because they're like how is it trading, how is it selling, right? Operational, obviously, from anywhere 3 weeks in advance to 1 week in advance to 1 day in advance to what's going on now. So you have multiple layers of people doing things, and then obviously overlapping interactions because you have to hand over the plans, make sure that they're translated properly, people understand what's going on. Then that turns into actionable sort of deliverables, and then sort of layers until the flights happen. And then after the flights happen, there's a whole bunch of other work going on around making sure that, what went wrong, if anything was wrong, any bags were lost, any drunken passengers, were we late, why we were late, cleaning, maintenance, that kind of thing. So it's sort of like a massive kind of, machine that is constantly being kept alive by many talented people. Very interesting industry.
That's so interesting. Like, just to let you know, I did bachelor's in aerospace engineering. So my thing is, I have my own personal thing why I'm asking that question also. But before I get into that, I want to ask you, like, what was the driving force behind transition from airline industry now to data integration and analytics? Like, why that change?
So, I mean, EasyJet was a very kind of interesting company, right? So I joined them many years ago, but they're still sort of in the startup thinking mode. And because of that, you sort of build everything or you experiment with a lot of things because you're pushing the boundaries, right? You're trying to find better ways to make money. Aviation is a very low margin industry in general, right? So any sort of bad trading year can wipe out your profits very, very quickly. I mean, if you remember, we had that volcano that cost us multiples of tens of millions, right? So things like that can really impact you. So what you're doing is you're constantly trying to innovate. And how do you innovate in aviation? How do you try to innovate in aviation is by using the available information or data, which you collect enormous amounts, right? So you get the information coming from the aircraft, from the air traffic controllers, from the airports, from the booking engine, from marketing people. You get that information coming up from multiple sources. And often it's siloed, disjointed. Finance will have their numbers because they're doing financial reporting. That's how they're used to seeing numbers in balance sheets, P&L, and they're comfortable with that. If you're doing planning on flights, how am I going to price this flight? Well, I know my cost base needs to be, this. And if your financial accounting is averages for everything, your flight is not a cost of averages. Your flight is actually costed based on what that flight cost is. Okay. Try figuring that out if the only financial information you get is the average information, right? So what you start getting these sort of problems that are like, to many people, just, well, it's superficial. But if you're pricing a flight that goes at peak time, its cost going to be higher because you're paying peak rates for different facility usages, right? Or you're going off peak time. So if you're pricing the same level, you'll probably underload in one and overload in the other one. So you need to figure out the balance around these type of things. So that's that thing. Then you're also planning around what airplanes should we buy? What the demand is going to be in the next 15, 20 years, because the life of the airplane is roughly useful life, 15, 20 years. If we buy should we buy smaller airplanes, fly smaller routes, or we buy bigger planes because demand's going to grow? So you do these type of modeling, right? What type of airplanes? Do we go with Boeing? Do we go with Airbus? Do we buy something else? Kind of engines you want to buy? Which airports should we serve, right? Somewhere in the central, like Heathrow, it's an expensive airport, but a lot of people around. Or we go somewhere tertiary, cheap to fly from. Can we pull the demand there? So you do a lot of these sort of modeling around heat maps of drive times, competitors to other, networks, say not just airlines, but trains, cars. Will people be willing to drive for an hour to get to your airport for a particular price, at which point...
So even external to the airport, you're thinking there.
Exactly. So you're doing all kinds of these things, right? Wow. Everything's based on data, obviously. So you do a lot of modeling around that. But getting that data from where it usually originates or gets aggregated to where you want to work with it, and it goes same for operational side. So they, for instance, want to know what is roughly the profitability of our network. So they can guess if they have a disruption, which flights to prioritize, which not. Is this flight full? If it's full, is it only once a week? So if we cancel that flight, all these people will be stuck at the destination for a week. Try repatriating that, very difficult, right? Yeah. Or it's a multi-daily frequency. So if we cancel the morning flight, we can squeeze them into the evening flight and they can come back that way. So for these sort of things, it's like how critical these flights are. So you're kind of balancing all that data. But like sharing that data is a problem, right? So I used to buy a lot of coffees and have very friendly conversations with a lot of stakeholders who own the data, because then you sort of can say, look, can you do me a favor and pull that report? So then I can do my stuff, right? But generally, it's not an easy way of doing it. So that's sort of kind of got me on the journey of thinking, okay, well, hang on a second. So my business partner used to be a head of data architecture at EasyJet as well, many years ago. And we had the same problem. So I was sort of the customer. He was the guy who was delivering it and trying to figure out the best ways of pulling the data from different systems into whatever I needed. And so we shared the frustrations, but from sort of two different angles. And that's where we kind of said, look, 80% of our problems are in an ability to pull the data properly and then actually validate it and trust it, right? So rather than, here's the data, I'm going to go and use it, I spend a lot of time making sure that that data is actually what it needs to be. Because sometimes people will dump, they don't understand what they have, they'll just give you a raw data dump, and then you have to figure out, well, I have 4 definitions of flight in this table, right? With all different values underneath. So I need to go and figure out what they meant by that data, right? So I spend my time trying to understand, first of all, what is the underlying data? Then make sure that once I understand what that data is, run the gross error checks on it, because from experience, I knew what I was looking for. And if suddenly these values are not what I'm expecting, I got a problem. right? So then I need to go,
Yeah,
even though that data might be correct, I still need to go and validate it because my reference point tells me something else. And
that's true.
and again, so wasting time, right? So the report I could have done in 15 minutes, I spent three
You're
days
still
just
trying to validate
exactly,
everything.
exactly, and that happens all the time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can put massive efficiencies around
Mm,
the business across the board if you just could get these people who know what they're doing, know what their data means, not just
mm,
talking to each other, but also electronically exchanging that data as and when in a robust manner. Now, whether we use, sort of standard ETL types of things and warehouse and, data lakes and then share from there, whether it's central or federated architectures is irrelevant, right? It's
mm,
whatever works for that business. But the important thing is we need to bring all of these pieces together. So then as a consumer, my department, for instance, would press a button and get that information and then we can use it, right? I don't
mm.
want, for instance, the machine to solve the problems for us necessarily, right? I mean, in certain cases, box standards
Yeah,
go
yeah,
for it. And AI can help a lot with sort of taking that burden away.
of course.
But generally, it's the creative guys that are working, girls working there, right? Who are
Mm,
really getting under the skin of what's going on, where the relationships might be, right? They
yeah.
just need to have that information in front of them all the time.
It's almost like if I summarize what you're saying, the problems is almost similar to every industry, like price optimization. That's what you were saying. Then market competition. That's again in every industry. Then logistics planning. That's what you're saying with the external input. And it's almost like the problems are same, but it's just based on the industry, the way how it is solved is different, I think.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And then now, because we went out of frustration, really. See, look, we can build a better product, which we think we did. And now that people are using it,
Hmm.
we are doing use cases across like really, really wide range of industries, right?
Mm,
From government to manufacturing to logistics, like you said, just
yeah,
environmental stuff, right? Really, really different areas. But the problem is always similar. Everybody
exactly.
needs to have the data at their fingertips so they can
Mm,
make use of it. And I mean, you know it better than I do because, you guys make a lot of data, generate a lot of data as well. And then you're starting to make use of it, getting your stakeholders to see
hmm.
pictures supported with the information that oh, that's interesting. Let me try that. And then you start seeing positive ROI, and then you start seeing
Mm,
improvement to your bottom line, and people start like, okay, well, but it's a journey always, right? You
yeah,
cannot
of
just
course.
say, look, buy my product and it's going to make your life better forever, right? Hopefully it will. But you got to take him on a journey and say, look, let's start small, do these things, see how it
Mm,
goes. You see the impact? Perfect. What other problems do you have? And then you start sort of playing around that. But a lot of times people make mistakes around, they just go buy technology, right? Well, everybody buys that and that, right? Because
yeah,
but
it
does
just
that
builds
fit
up.
your use case? Exactly. Because, you buy the stack and then you can't use it because, well, you don't need half of it. I've seen use cases where people would just buy a CRM and barely use any of that functionality there, right? Just because,
Mm,
well, really, they could have gone with a spreadsheet for free, but
yeah,
yeah,
it's just not knowing what is needed from that,
correct.
whatever technology is needed. That's good. I can understand why you started. Then I see that you have been within that industry, seeing that source. There are multiple sources, but there is no one to validate it or even process it and do. I think I can see that. So when you started IO Blend, like what are the biggest challenges you faced as a founder? Like how did you navigate them? So I'm
Yeah.
assuming now you are working in airline. Now suddenly it's a new field, so what are the challenges you have gone through?
Well, first of all, you got to have that bug that always wants you to do something different, right? So I had that
Mm,
forever. Always wanted to start business, and but it is a quite a big jump, right? So you sort of going from well, you know what's going to happen tomorrow, every day after, right? So you sort of getting a steady paycheck, and
yeah.
you got the
All
team
the perks of
supporting
it.
you. Yeah, everything, all the infrastructure, architecture is around you, supporting
Hmm.
you with your job. Here, you're basically building it all from scratch. right? You gotta get marketing done, you gotta get finances, accounting, HR, you gotta get all these pieces aligned, obviously sales process, support, development, R&D, that kind of thing. Yeah, it is difficult. Always is. You get support along the way, obviously. The bright people are still around us. I mean, we got board advisors, we've got partners we work with.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Wow,
you
that's
sort of
good.
build that network as you go. You get people to believe in you, and they'll support you, and that's where you grow. But it is not for the faint-hearted. That's for sure.
So it's basically a network and trust, basically, by other people, or
Yeah,
like I'm assuming your investors and everyone.
that's
I
it.
think that, wow, that's
Yeah,
cool.
I
So,
mean, usually if you think about it, right? So whether you're selling a product or a service, right?
Mhm.
Technology, right? You're not really selling technology. You're selling relationship.
Yeah,
Do I
that's true.
trust this guy? Is he going to come through? And he's talks a good game, but if I
Mm.
buy from him, am I going to get screwed over? Right? Is he going to walk out on me or something? Right? So new technology, you got to take a risk, right? So same thing. So you sort of network, you get people comfortable, like any kind of
Mm.
friendship, essentially, right? And then people start using it, and then people start understanding it, and then this word of mouth, right? Well, I use that. That's pretty good. You should
Mm.
try.
Yeah.
And then you get the sort of the secondhand approaches that you get. Then you get use cases going through, right? Suddenly, oh, wow,
Mm.
they solved that kind of problem. I have a similar problem. I'm going to give them a call. And then you sort of slowly start getting out. But it's a journey. That's why I say it takes, you get
Yeah.
ups and downs. Sometimes you get a bug in the software and you get yelled at. Happens.
Mm.
But, it's how quickly you can fix it. And,
That's true.
you
That's
know,
true. Like having spent in such a like at a large company like EasyJet for so many years, like what lessons did you think you have brought into IO Blend from there? If you can name any few
very
of
good
them.
question. Because the airline was so growing and entrepreneurial at its heart,
Mhm.
you get to do a lot of things. So
Mm.
I got to do, like you said, network planning. I did strategy, fleet purchasing, operations, commercial, all kinds of stuff, scheduling. And you sort of get that kind of, overall skill of how everything works within the airline.
Mhm.
So that skill is transferable to a
Mm.
startup because you again doing a lot of things from different functions yourself. The underlying skills, your strategic thinking, planning, your financial planning, analytics around stuff, CRM, product
Mm.
development, releases, that kind of thing, right? So you get on top of those problems using the skills that you've collected over the years. Obviously, the longer you stay in the industry, if you're doing interesting things, you hone those skills, you develop new skills, right? So it's never too late to learn, like I say. And that's where it helps a lot, right? If you're just one area focusing, for instance, just doing one job for 10 years,
Mm.
that might be a bit more overwhelming because you're really good, say, at accounting, right? And that
Yeah.
you will be brilliant at that, but you'll be hopeless at sales and marketing, right? So
That's
that's
true.
where you sort of need to go around and
Mm.
develop skill sets as broadly as you can if you're trying to do a startup.
I think I agree to that fact. Like the broader you know about whichever company you're working in, you actually get ideas about, okay, I can solve all this in such a way. Like everyone has their own way of solving things. But I think that's how from idea, you start a company, then you get everyone on the board. It becomes a product. I think that's how everything, they just starts from there. That's cool. Before we go into the next part, like, can you explain in your own terms, what does IO Blend does it to any layman? You want to explain
Yeah, sure. That's actually a good question. Yeah, so we specialize in data integration. Uh,
it?
our product we developed specifically to solve the bugbears of data integration. So you get systems of different vintages, different styles, sitting with different departments, often siloed, sometimes in the cloud, sometimes on-prem,
Mm.
could be anywhere, spreadsheets, right? So you get that data somewhere. If you can get to it electronically, our premise was we should be able to get to it very quickly and very easily.
Mm.
So that's what we've built. So like you said, we built on the top of Apache Spark because it's a distributed framework, very efficient, can do big data, can do small data, can be real time, can be do batch. And once you have access to that data, right, we went a few steps beyond that, right? So rather than just doing extraction and load, like a lot of these ingestion tools are, and then you put it into a staging layer and just do processing afterwards, I call it just pick up and dump the data somewhere. We've put a layer of intelligence in between. So you do technical data quality as the data is flowing between origin and its destination. So you can dedupe it, you can check for schema integrity, you can, validate the metadata around it, you can track lineage, where's that data coming from, which process generated it when, and so on, right? So you do all of these sort of background data engineering tasks that you would be doing in the staging layer. And then on top of that, we obviously automated that, so you don't need to worry about it. So if it picks up any of these kind of anomalies, it'll spit out exceptions. So it narrows your job from looking through millions and millions of, say, data records, right? Trying to find what the anomaly was, to actually look at these 1,000 records. This is where it's wrong, and this particular field you need to look at. And then you can validate that by exception. Right?
It basically filters out everything, and only at the end part, it tells you, I need someone to actually validate that part.
That's right.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So with AI and automation, which you were saying about data engineering within the company, where do you see this data engineering in the next 5 to 10 years with all this AI and automation?
Very, very interesting. If you think about it, right? And this is sort of a scary kind of conversation, which I'm not very comfortable around yet, because I don't think people thought that through, right?
Yeah.
The conversation is, look, we're going to automate all these sort of admin menial tasks at the bottom layer, right? So we'll have senior people and AI. And the problem with that is, how do you become senior? Where's the journey, right? That's one. The second one is, if you relying so much on technology, your senior people need to be very good, because AI isn't perfect, right? So it's a probabilistic technology. And so what you need to do is then sort of validate that. So you need to need somebody who knows what they're doing inside out to pick up maybe a slight anomaly that could have a massive impact down the road. So this needs to be some checks and balances along the way, right? But in terms of data engineering, so everybody says, look, we'll just get rid of the coders, right? I mean, a lot of the code is actually not bad now. If you run Python and SQL, it's scarily good. Okay, you still need to sort of go and, exactly. But it's not 90% rebuild, right? It's sort of there. And I mean, it's interesting. And we use it, obviously, because it's a great technology. But we know what we're doing, right? But, okay, so that makes it more efficient, right? So, and I agree, at some point, coding will sort of become less of a chore, right? So you go into sort of these sort of low code, no code types of data products, right?
Yeah.
Which is good, because you get, if you're not a technical guy, right? All you care about is, can I get my data to do X, Y, and Z, or can I get my information and present it in a certain way, right? Let the machine take care of it, right? So you sort of start communicating with it on a different level. Rather than typing commands, you typing prompts, right? So you've got your Gen AI going here. And eventually you might be able just to converse with it if we get to the AGI sort of stage. But that said, we start putting in AI agents in our pipelines, because people sort of saying, look, well, I've got this data, which is unstructured in the documents, PDFs, right? And I got this structured data here as well. They need to come together. We have a person doing it manually. How can we automate that? So that's where you start putting agents inside. You limit so I call it the clean sheet prompting, because we do prompting for them automatically, based on the criteria, right? So they are looking for contract information. We know what the contract information looks like, which bits need to be pulled out. So the person just asks, I need, from this date to that date, we'll find it. And it comes back. So the person in charge is a subject matter expert at contracts and finance, not at prompt engineering. So they don't get overwhelmed at prompting stuff, and learning. There's a whole course to teach people
Of
how
course.
to, I mean, they don't have time for it.
Mm.
But now you save them hours of sort of waiting for a report to be compiled, send it to them by email and so on. It happens instantaneously, right? As fast as the LLM can process it, and then brings that information to them. They don't need to worry about it. I think that data engineering will enable these types of jobs for
Mm.
the next 3-4 years, right? These will become more and more prevalent
Wow.
because they'll simplify actual working life rather than complicated with layers and layers of technology or funny speak around technology, right? I mean, as a
Mm.
techies, we love it. But they, in the business, they don't care. That's not their job, right? They just
Yeah.
want to get on with the job.
Mm. That's how fast you can bring the data. Doesn't matter how it is,
All
but
right.
just bring me the whole thing.
I was talking to a CEO once, and he was like, "Why are you telling me all these? I don't care. It can flow in the river or in the sewer pipe. I don't care. As long as the data is there, that's what interests me. And it looks like what I expected it to look like.
Yeah.
How you do it, this is not my business. Here's the check and go make it work." Right. And so this is sort of the conversation sometimes I have.
Wow. So you emphasized about this like low code solution, and since I've seen firsthand the IO blend tool, I know it's like kind of drag and drop
Yeah.
thing. Like, how do you see the balance between like low code and no code, and what is the need for a skilled data engineer?
Yeah. Well, I'm a proponent of skilled people in general, right?
Hmm.
And the reason we got to this tool was because we have skilled data engineers behind it, right? People who know and understand the ins and outs of how technology works, right?
Mm.
It's the same thing for any business, right? I mean, making frames for
Right.
eyeglasses, you gotta know
Of
exactly
course.
what works, how the technology weights and
Mm.
materials and so on, right? Aviation, the same thing, right? If you put inexperienced people to run an airline, disaster, right? So you've got somebody really who knows that stuff. So, but because we know the building blocks
Mm.
of the process behind every business, right? If you take data engineering away
Hmm.
and you depend on the machine to develop your code, right? How are you going to move the game forward? What it would be the next layer of evolution in that technology, right? Is the machine going to improve on itself? That's terrifying, right? That's Terminator thing, right? That's
Yeah.
Skynet coming. And maybe one day we'll get there, which is, but generally you need somebody to build on top of it. But the only way you're going to build on top is if you understand how the bottom works.
Mm.
And if you do any kind of research, because you've done aerospace and you do a lot of literature research, right? You
Yep.
understand who's done what
Who's done
on that
what? Yeah.
topic, right? You've done the
Yeah.
analysis of what
Mm.
worked, what didn't work. And then oh, okay, actually, to take this forward, this needs to happen. And you
Mm.
incrementally build it. And that's where I think the future of data engineering will remain. It might not be, millions and millions of data engineers, but I will always see room for really
Skilled.
the skilled
Yeah.
people. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's good. And the other hot topic I hear is about data mesh. So I want to explain, I want you to explain that in simple terms, and how does IO Blend actually simplify this for other organizations?
No, absolutely. And funny enough, I just had a conversation around centralized versus mesh
Mhm.
architectures with a friend last week, and we had a debate. So essentially, data mesh, it's a federated data architecture, right? So you've got
Mhm.
different teams within the business who would own their product, their own, and they will serve that data or the information that they've aggregated and processed as a product
Mhm.
to other customers. So everything is sort of interlinked. You need
Mm.
commercial data. Operations can go and mine it. It will be catered to their particular use case and served as a product. There will be contracts around that and so on, right? Versus centralized is where you got a central sort of IT data team, right? That own the whole thing. You send request, I need that table, and they'll go and do it for you. So one is a bit more secure, central, because
Mhm.
one team sort of centrally controls the whole thing, but it's slower, obviously, because it's based
Mm.
on priorities as and when you can get. Federated, you sort of do a self-service type of thing around.
It's like silo.
Correct. Yeah, you just sort of mesh people around. And I've seen both in real life, right? With the varying degrees of success. Centralized is obviously classic. It's still in many, many organizations. It's the way to do it, especially the more legacy sort of businesses, banks, insurance types you go, the more centralized they'll be because they got layers of protection around that. More modern companies would be mesh oriented. Let's try to break the barriers, move faster type thing. But sometimes they work. Depends on the teams. Some teams could be very good at knowing what they're doing. Some teams are not. So then you sort of get into these bottlenecks anyway, just on the localized area, right? You always get frustrated. Why can't those finance guys give me stuff or enable me to get the stuff? Because somebody was on holiday for 3 weeks, no one else knows how to use that. Things like that. So we work with both, right? So essentially, if you create sort of a channel network between different systems or products, and it doesn't matter whether they're located centrally or at different nodes, as long as you can interlink them efficiently. And again, remember, we're going back to the same issue. Do I trust the data? Is it timely? Do I understand what it means, right? And you can have a contract around that. That's what I want that data from, but you can have it with the central team. You can have it with the mesh team. Again, it's whatever works for your organization. It's the speed of getting things done is where it's better. So if you can make the centralized team, and I've seen that happen, efficient and automated, essentially, then they just look by exception, right? They'll just make sure, credentials, security, all that done. People go do things themselves within a governed centralized repository. Master data is enforced there and so on. And it all works. And again, we act as a conduit between the systems to smooth that journey for them. But in terms of architecture itself, I don't think that makes a big difference.
So we're talking about the speed of data, how it's delivered. Why do you think everyone is preferring streaming versus batch processing in terms of this? Like why I see that more everyone is going into streaming processing. I'm like, I don't know why. Maybe you can explain me that, but
fair point. So, I mean, if you think about it, right? There's sort of two types of data that we see. One is transactional, event-driven data. That's your real-time data. Something happened, sensor picked up some information, the data has been generated, right? You made a purchase at the till, that transaction's just been picked up, right? Now, who's consuming that data, right? If you're, say, a finance planner or an analyst, you're doing your dashboard once a day, maybe once a week. If you're a finance guy, checking on how the sales going. You don't care when those sales were generated, right? You're just dumping them into a warehouse. There's a nice collection at the end of the week. You pull out your Power BI dashboard, right? And then you can see it. You can do it week-on-week comparisons and on. So batch jobs absolutely fine for that. And most of the businesses still work on that sort of premise, right? And that's fine. That's for analytics, right? Say you're in operations now, and you're doing airline, and your flight's about to be delayed. And you know about it because the airport from where the airplane should depart just says, look, we lost power, and there is no electricity in the terminal. We can't dispatch the airplane. Now, the passengers on the receiving end waiting for their flight sort of to depart because it'll be the same airplane returning, right? They want to know about that sort of in real time because, oh, hang on a second. I don't have to rush to the airport, or, I have to rush to the airport because the flight's going to come earlier because maybe they did find a way to dispatch it, right? Or there is a thunderstorm coming up and, the operations need to know which way to divert the flight so you can go around that. So that information you want to know in real time. So it's constantly updating because the frequency and the decision-making window is much smaller than, for instance, doing analytics on historical data. So that's also quite important, yes, but it depends what the use case is.
Yeah, I think I totally agree to that. If it's like, that's what I understood, that if it's like for a very small scale business, where let's say you want a live dashboard and you have very small scale data, you can go either of it. I don't want to complicate things to go by streaming, but I would say batch processing could actually work for them.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I mean,
and that,
the other notion around that is because streaming is technologically is more complex to implement, right? So if you're
Mhm.
doing coding and you're using even raw Spark or you
Mm.
working with Kafka, right? You have to code. You got to know it. You got to find somebody who knows how to code it and manage that, right?
Mm.
Especially if you're a small company or startup, it's very hard to find that skill set, right? It's expensive, right?
That's true.
So people tend to say, okay, well, what's my next best thing? So you can go down to like micro batching, schedule jobs.
Mm.
The other thing is it was always sort of expensive to process streaming because you constantly ran expensive clusters, for instance, right?
Mm.
Even though that's not true anymore because you don't have that complexity around managing everything. It's done automatically for you with new tools, us being one of them. You can now take that problem away because you're not processing massive batches of data once at a time. You're doing event based. It's actually cheaper because you're only putting very small loads while pushing
Mm.
through the data at frequency, right? Again, depends which systems you use because some systems penalize you for using real time. They weren't built for it, so they'll charge you through the nose for it. But
Mm.
generally, it's still it's a misconception from old days, and I can totally understand where it comes from. But if people are considering real time now, it's no longer as scary as it used to be.
Mm. That's interesting. And I also see that like when I worked, like when I was trying to play with IOBlend tool, it doesn't stage the data. It basically extract, transforms, and loads. What's the technical advantage for of this approach, basically?
Yeah. So if you have a staging layer, which by all
Mm.
means, it's an architectural approach, you sort of dump the data and you're expected to do processing on that data in the staging layer, right? So say you're using something like Databricks and you'll have your
Yeah.
bronze, silver, gold layers, right? Which means you need to go and physically do something there. You can automate the process, you can write a bot to do things, processing, or you have somebody manually checking that stuff, right?
Mm.
And you sort of have a bunch of things sitting around validating quality, doing aggregations, transformations, lineage, tracking, metadata management, right? So you got all these elements around
Yeah.
that. With a tool like ours is you do that processing while the data is
Mm.
in motion. So by the time you land it somewhere,
Yeah.
you can land it ready for consumption. So you can add transformations in flight, right? So it speeds up the process, lowers your operational costs. You don't have to have an intermediate system, for instance, as a staging layer. You can
Yeah.
bypass that all entirely. And then your data is ready for consumption in the warehouse, which we
Whichever.
maintain as well.
Mm.
Exactly. So
Mm.
that is the advantage around that. Again,
Yeah.
you can architect and you can still have a staging layer. You can just pre-process a lot up front. Uh,
Mm.
but it sort of begs the question, do I need to spend money on that?
Yeah. I don't know if I've read it in the blog in that IO blend or somewhere. It's called ETL in flight. Is that what I've read it
That's
in
it.
your
That's it.
blogs? I think.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. I was like, wow, that's actually cool. I've never read it anywhere else, so that's why I was like, I could recognize. Okay, just jumping from tech to your entrepreneurship side, like, what are the most underrated skills that helped you scale IO Blend? Like, because I know you have worked for 13 years in EasyJet.
Yeah.
So how did you bring those skills and suddenly build a product now out of it?
So on the technical side, look, my business partner's really, really good, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the technical stuff is, right? The best part is communication.
Hmm.
Very important. You communicate with your customers, you communicate with your partners, you communicate with, podcasts and so on, right? You got to be able to, well, translate what you've built into human language, right? Second, you got to also get under the skin of the problems. Every customer
Hmm.
comes in, they have a particular thing in mind. It might not necessarily be what you end up building for them, but that's one thing that's bugging them, right? And you need to
Hmm.
figure out what it is. Sometimes they can't express what it is. They just say, well, we got a problem here. That data is not good. We don't know why it's not good, but we want to fix that and it's going to make our lives easier. Once you sort of look at it and understand that actually that's not at all what their problem is, it's actually a people problem, not technology problem, right? And then you sort of, okay. So you gotta figure out, you gotta communicate it to them, you gotta educate them how it works. You got to be able to receive that information, analyze it, and then also then communicate back whatever the answer is. That's very important. Very, very important. A lot of technical guys, yeah, and you know how it is, right? It's not always natural to go and sort of talk to the business.
Yeah.
They're really good at technical side, but not very good talking to business, understanding what actually people want. Sometimes they don't care. I just want to do my, Spark code, and that's all I do, and I'm very good at it. But do you know what you're building, and why are you even building this? So, that's where I think that's one of the most powerful things. I mean, other things you can acquire, learn, you learn around marketing, you learn around sales. Obviously, naturally talented people, it's a lot easier comes to them, but you can learn these things, right? But communication, you need to really, really work on that.
And I also see that, like, how do you, like, as a CEO, how do you balance leading people as well as I see you coming up, like, how do you keep up with these technical innovations? Like, how do you balance both, basically? Because I see you at events and I see on your LinkedIn post, you're going somewhere else. At the same time, you're trying to manage the company. Like, how do you balance both at the same time?
Fair point. Well, I like what I do. So when you like what you do, you enjoy doing it, right? So I'm always interested to learn about new things, new technologies, new ways people doing things, right? So we're all solving problems, right? Some of them are more fundamental, big, like say with AI now, right? So that's a sort of a step change in technology. And obviously very curious around that, what applications are, how people can use it, misuse it, and so on, right? And I've seen a lot of, so now a lot of people experimenting with AI. I mean, it's any business you go to, everyone's playing with it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's then translating from, we've built this pilot, right? It works really well. We trained it. It does these 100 documents or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you scale it out to the rest of the business? Well, sort of doesn't work because the data problem or the people problem, right? So then you try to, by reading, understanding how other people done things, talking to people, and then you start kind of bridging these gaps and saying, oh, actually, you know what, you can do this. Or maybe you need to train them that, or take them on a cultural journey, or de-risk the technology so people are not threatened by it. And then from a technical perspective, you can throw different tools or processes or replace systems or just reconnect them in a different way. But you have to always kind of learn about these things because the world doesn't stand in the same place, right? And obviously, as you're running the business, becomes a bit more BAU because you already get used to it, right? Well, I'm doing my accounts, I'm doing my people management stuff, and I'm doing my sales calls and so on. These are all kind of lining up. Obviously, as you grow, you get different sort of functions that are helping you grow with it. But if you don't enjoy, it'll be a chore. If you love it, it's a hobby.
You just go. That's
exactly.
Cool. Like I see that many tech startups where they're okay with like having a product and they come up with an idea and they start it. But the problem is that they don't know how to scale it up. Like they have started their own company now. They've got investors in all that. Okay. But I see, after 1 year or 2 years, I don't see those same companies actually. They're not there. They're not there anywhere because I think they're not able to scale it up. So how do you scale up IO Blend basically? Any strategies you could just let us know?
Well, I don't know if there is one strategy that fits them all type of thing, right? It's not easy. It depends. It depends on where you are in the industrial cycle, right? So you can have a brilliant product, but bad timing. No one's going to buy it.
Yeah.
Or you can have great timing. Everybody wants to buy it. You don't have a product. So you're sort of just starting off. By the time you get there, market moves on, right? So that equation, right? Then you have sort of the challenge around, you can have the best product on the planet. But if people don't know about you, don't know anything about your company, it's a brand new product, you're going to a big enterprise that has been, with Microsoft or Amazon or Google for the last 15 years. And your product wipes the floor with their stack, right? But they'll never buy it. They'll never buy it because,
the price
they have
is
to take
high.
a risk. And big companies don't like taking risks, especially on unproven tech. So then you got that. It's hard to scale, right?
Yeah.
So, and then they get frustrated if they're highly dependent on, doing a lot of marketing. exhibitions, big budget
Mm.
sort of events. You go and spend that marketing money that you've raised from VCs,
Mm-hmm.
you're getting no traction. So you burn through the cash, then you're laying off people, and then you shut down the shop, right? Or you get, if you're lucky, you get bought out by somebody.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's the problems. I mean, we're sort of a little bit different because we come out from, well, by nature of it, we come from the low cost airline business, right? Where you sort of
Mm.
think around costs a lot more around
Optimization
that
always.
revenue. Exactly. So we manage it differently. It's a longer
Mm.
journey, obviously, for
Yeah.
us to grow because we're not splashing money on massive events and promotions.
Mm.
But we're trying to get into partnerships and, actually
Deals.
physically go and
Yeah.
network with people face to face. And then you solve their problems one by one, and then it starts scaling out that way. So more like organic growth rather than a
Mm.
big bang in your face. Both work, but again, I think the big bang you need to figure out that it be perfect on timing and just hit the right spots at the right time. Uh, and that's not easy.
That's true. Like in such a competitive space, like especially I think tech nowadays is so competitive. How do you stay motivated and you want to still keep innovating things? How do you
Well,
do
yeah,
that?
first you got to have thick skin, right? Because yeah, no, I mean, it's not easy, right?
Of
Sometimes
course.
you just, you'll have a bad week, month, few
Mm.
months you might have, and then you'll have something better. And you got to have mental strength to stay with it, right? So
Yeah.
that's another advice for entrepreneurs, right? You really need to have
Mm.
mental strength to do it. When it comes together, it's so rewarding, and that motivates you, right? So you can have
Yeah.
hits and misses. If you have more hits than misses, you'll win. So focus on just, doing,
Just doing it,
yeah.
doing the actual
And then
thing.
your misses will start getting fewer, your hit
Mm.
get bigger. And because you're learning as well from the misses, why didn't it work? What went wrong? Was it the product? Was it the customer? Was it timing? X, Y, and Z? How do I solve that? And you go sort of step by step by step through these. And then you say, okay, well, that one was a hit. Can we
Mm.
replicate that elsewhere? And then eventually you'll hit it. So, yeah.
That's true. I think when you talk on the same replicating things, I just want to turn a small twist with that is that people always get scared of using tech into their business because of data privacy. I don't know, because the first thing they think about is whenever they want to introduce any new technology, the thing is like, okay, oh, everything the tech knows now. Like, so how do you deal with those kind of customers, and what role companies should actually think of instead of thinking like every time, now, let's say AI now, everyone thinks that AI means, oh, it's going to know everything, it's going to take away my job. But as a tech people, I know it's not going to be there, but I don't know how to give them the message that that is not true.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you would have seen many clients and many other people. So I'm just saying from your experience with data privacy, I see that's the biggest concern of all the business people whom I have talked to. So what role should companies like yours play, like ensuring that they actually are responsible with data use?
So there's whole countries in the world that refuse to go to the cloud because of that. So it's not just businesses,
Yeah. Okay.
right? But there is a risk. I mean, like with
Mm.
any technology, right? So this is why there's so many cybersecurity companies around offering solutions around data privacy, data protection. We've got laws governing it. You got your
Mm.
GDPR. It's not, I mean, there might be rogue players out there, but generally, if you are in the business, say you're doing it in your own company, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are legally required to comply with the data privacy, data protection regulations, and you'll have an information security policy within your company that governs how you protect your data and how you share it, even internally, right?
Mm.
So you have policies for HR, you have policies for health and safety, you've got a data policy, data security policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like any other policy, you comply with it. Now,
Mm.
if people don't believe that that policy works, there's a fundamental issue within the company, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of sort of can tell them around, look, you already have these protections inherently built in, right?
Mm.
Second thing is then technologies like ours, for instance, you can de-risk it further, right? Certain companies within financial industry, right? They're paranoid around security.
Mm.
Obviously, yeah, I'd rather them be paranoid than not, but they're looking after our money. But that's where you are. So you de-risk it then through architectural stuff. So the least amount of interactions externally you can get with that data, for instance, the better. So if you can completely, ring fence it, keep it in their sandbox, so to speak, then that's what you build for them. And then you'll have a gatekeeper at the end of it who will be the single, for instance, source of that information. And everybody will fill in the form at worst case scenarios, right? And then they'll serve them that data. I've seen that happen. But depending on what the level of paranoia is within the business, you can architect it. It'll be not cheap, but you can architect for it, right? Now, if you bring it down to the AI side, will AI replace jobs? And the answer is yes, it will. Some
Of
jobs.
course.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
admin jobs,
Yeah,
definitely. Some of it's
definitely.
going to get automated, right? Not all of it,
Mm-hmm.
but if it's repeatable, boring, mind-numbing, life-sucking.
Anything with a pattern, I feel, can be automated.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the pattern, you don't even need AI to automate it, right? You can just have a decision tree
The,
and be done with
yeah.
it.
Mm-hmm.
So it will work. The thing is, it's like, when we switched from horses to automobiles, right?
Mm.
Um, yeah, but people stopped tendering to courses and became car mechanics and start, building
Yeah.
different things, right? Roads and the all associated things, wonderful things around cars. It'll say the same thing around AI. It's
Mm.
what I like to say is think around AI is sort of a helpful colleague, a junior maybe, but a helpful colleague who you can work with, but ultimately you're still their mentor. You're still looking after them. You're still making the design of.
Mm.
If you think about it this way, people then start getting a bit more comfortable because they're still in the loop, right?
Yeah.
They might not
Mm.
necessarily physically do the menial work themselves, but they suddenly got a colleague who does that for them and they can
Mm.
do clever stuff, actually using the brain that they have wonderful brains to do problem solving, improvement of their processes. So if the last, because I've seen so many times, you go to somebody's desk and they're like, "Oh, I'm so busy, I can't even talk to you for 2 minutes." I'm like, really? You can't be that overworked, right? I mean, something's wrong with that job if you're completely buried in it, right? So if
Yeah.
you take even 20, 30% of whatever that stuff he's buried in away,
Mm.
suddenly that person has 30% more time to do other things. Look at the
Yeah.
efficiencies around the process or create something different, new technology, right? And I think that's where it's going to be a big win. And I think that's the way we need to position it.
That's true. I
But
think it enhances your own job basically.
yes,
Uh, that's
it
true.
might be a slightly different job as well, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that you're no longer part of that journey. It just means you could be doing something better. But that's a scary thing. Change is always scary, right? And there's a
Of
whole
course. Anywhere.
theory around change management, exactly. But
Mm.
but that's it's applicable to anything: restructuring of a company, building new facilities, bringing in new
Yeah.
technology. It's the same thing. It's just
Mm.
managing that transition. Once people are comfortable, it might take years. They get used to it, and then it goes.
Yeah. It is exciting, but as well as a little bit scared because of the uncertainty we have still now. So it's a mix of both, I would say. Before we start like wrapping up, I'll just ask like, how is data shaping the future of aviation industry? Since you have worked around a decade in now aviation, and now you have also built up your own company and the tool also that's almost integrating multiple sources. Like, how do you think data is shaping the future with respect to aviation industry? Let's say, for example.
I would like to say it should be more. Again, a lot
Mm.
of the stuff is still ingrained in the old ways. You get people doing the certain things the certain way for many years. It
Mm.
works. They're comfortable with it and they continue on, right? Ups and
Mm.
downs of all that. If you start everybody wishing for new, better things to improve, right? So they can do, let's say, digital twins.
Yeah.
You can build a copy of your airline and experiment, iterate, right? You do simulations around that. You can
Mm-hmm.
do better operational planning, because it costs them millions every time there is disruption, right? How do
Mm.
you minimize disruptions, right? Well, there are various ways. There's a sledgehammer approach, and then there will be some finely tuned ones where you'd use better tools, better systems, better data to analyze that, right? But everything sort of requires investment in time, people, money, obviously, to get you there. And that's a process. And that takes maybe a year or two to get there. Because again, you need to understand how you're solving the old problem with the new way, validate it, experiment it, refine it, make sure it works, right? Because it's going to be
Mm.
an iterative process. A lot of talk, not enough sort of let's get on, try it, right? They might try it locally. We'll do optimization around crew planning, or we'll do optimization around fuel burn, or we'll do optimization around safety.
Mm.
But overall, say operations or the airline overall, not quite happening yet. And that's not just my old airline, it's across the board.
Okay.
Yeah. There are
What's
some
interesting?
airlines who are newer, more modern. They're
Mm.
basically doing better things. You look at legacy stuff, say like, our flag carriers around the planet, and
Mm-hmm.
no, that's
No,
very old
still
school.
need to
Yeah,
be improved.
yeah.
That's cool. And outside of IO Blend, what new technologies actually excite you more?
I'm really interested in this AI wave, and the reason
Mm.
is my business partner was working on his AI thesis 25 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that far back, right? When it was still theory, right? We
Mm.
didn't have technology to actually run the training at scale like we have the processing power of NVIDIA chips now back then. But the theory is the same. Fundamental, if you look at the what sits underneath
It's the same.
OpenAI, it's the
Mm.
same approach, right? And then you got this DeepSeek come out with a little bit cleverer thing. And again, that's
Yeah.
also 20 years plus
Oh,
theory.
research. Yeah.
So it's now that exciting theory being applied in real life with better
Mm.
machines behind it to refine it, right? And that this happened in the last, 18, 24 months
Yep.
tops since it
Mhm.
became,
Yeah.
mainstream. Now, fast forward that 2 years from now, if they start refining and improving these models and they start retaining memory
Mm.
and they start making decisions themselves, you're starting to get close to AGI, right?
Yeah. And you
And
start putting reasoning into
AI
that.
is a stepping stone, right? It's convenient, interesting. You play with it. It helps you here and there, right? It's not going to be the end technology. It's the next evolution that is interesting, right? And that's what gets me interesting, but also terrifies, because it depends how we govern it.
Mm.
It can come after us. And
That's true. That's true. And the one thing I want to add to that is that AGI, sometimes what I listen and learn from others is that if it starts bringing reasoning into the world, it is exciting. But at the same time, how much is the barrier to it? Like, is there any barrier or is there any structure around it? I think that's where the whole scary part comes in.
well,
It goes
I
into
mean,
Terminator and everything.
exactly. So you've got Terminators on one side, which is, but then you get something like Star Wars, where these robots are there, they're
Yeah,
reasoning, they got personalities, but they're there to assist
just assist you.
humans, exactly, and they sort of work as a colleague. Uh,
Mm.
well, sometimes servants even, but in the sense they're moving forward humanity or the intergalactic species towards being more efficient, do dangerous things, help making clever decisions, complex
Yeah,
calculations, that kind of thing. And these things might replace computers altogether,
that's true.
because again, that is properly governed. You got these, safety directives. I mean, we've seen a lot of sci-fi movies to see it go both ways, right? And this is in our, as humanity, control
Mm.
uh, to make sure that it doesn't run away. But there's always a rogue player, right? So if it does run away, can you stop it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting and as well as exciting to see how it grows, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. And having worked in now aviation, logistics, and now your own data company, what's one industry that supports Surprisingly, it's a data-driven like industry, you would see.
Very good question. It's sort of depends on the level of complexity of the business, right? So you would think a simple factory, right, that has, I don't know, making widgets would have just basic, program in there, and they'll just churn out millions and millions of the same exact widget. You'd be surprised how many sensors and information and control mechanisms along the production line that they actually have. And you need to analyze that data, and you also put the optimization algorithms on top of it, real-time decision-making, optimizing machines based on the quality of the raw materials, the speed of processing, and so on. I was gobsmacked, right? So these things that you don't expect. I mean, you see factories. I mean, I can only imagine what the Tesla factory looks like.
Yeah.
It's like full robotics there, right? I mean, that must be amazing. And then you get airlines, obviously very heavily data-driven, but then you see paperwork everywhere, I mean, some airlines still issue paper tickets, right?
That's true.
Physically written by hand paper tickets. So you get that in the digital world.
Well,
So
wow.
yeah, it's I'm more surprised, not as much as which industries use more data, but more around how they use data and how much. Yeah, so you can get under the skin of many businesses and use a lot of data for it. It's just enabling them to even think around, wow, we never thought about that.
That's true.
And
That's
how
true.
that improves. Yeah.
Because I see this word data-driven as a marketing gimmick now, but actually I don't know if is it actually data-driven within the company. That's why I think I asked this question: where within all these three industries, where do you see like
I don't know about the data-driven bit either, right? I don't like that expression.
Okay.
I mean, everything's data-driven. I mean, you and I talking, we got some kind of data in our heads, we're sharing it, and that's data-driven conversation, right? Facts-based.
Yeah.
People using spreadsheet, people using calculator is data-driven. You're just calculating what these monthly expenses are. So I think that's the marketing spin. In terms of using quality data, operational data, commercial data that is pertinent to your business operations, right?
Yeah.
What makes your organization tick? Using more of that in a better way, that would be my understanding of data-driven or data-enhanced business, I would say, right? Because if you switch off your computers, if the business shuts down tomorrow, yeah, you got a problem, right? But a lot of the businesses will survive on a piece of paper and a few people shouting at each other, right? It will work. Airlines won't. They'll shut down. But something like a factory will.
That's true.
So, or a shop that's selling, like your grocery shop. The tills might go down, but if they really needed to, they can just, collect money manually. Exactly.
Yeah. I get the point. Thanks a lot. I think there's a lot we have shared on this podcast. One last thing is, if any books or podcasts or thought leaders that have significantly shaped your thinking, whom do you think they are?
Well, that's a very good question. So, I mean, if you're sort of into books, right? Fundamentals of Data Engineering by Joe Rees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good one. Obviously, I know him and we're friends. And but his sort of insights are very, very interesting around the industry in general. He's very cutting edge understanding of stuff. Generally, just following what the publications are around it, because a lot of this is sifting through noise, marketing and then pitches versus what is actually real underneath, right? And that's not always easy. Because every time you sort of, you can see the trend. Everyone's would run this technology. It's going to solve all your problems. And everybody talks about it for like a couple of months. Then the money runs out and it sort of fades away, right? You don't see that type of product there anymore. Something else comes out.
Yeah.
It's the same with AI now. You can see some different, oh, we do this. Oh, we do that. Oh, this is that's the next biggest thing, right? Filter through what's underneath, what makes sense. And then you sort of make your own decisions around, would I want to be the pioneer, or do I just want to sit back and wait how it pans out and then become the later adopter? right?
That's
And then
true.
you can play that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm fan of George's weekly rants where he does it
That's
every
right.
week.
That's right.
I like more than technical knowledge. He likes the way his point of view basically about certain things. That's where I think I like it. Anyway, well, thank you so much for on this podcast, and thank you for sharing a lot of things about aviation technology. And I think I think we have even few entrepreneurship lessons also within this whole 1 hour. So thank you so much, Val. I hope you had really good fun.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Sai. Always fun to, have chats with you, and wishing you all the best and
So thank you.
success. And yeah, hope to see you in real life sometime soon.
So thank you, Val. Have a nice day.
You too. Cheers.
You cheers.